painters, and welcome to week 2 of Watercolours with Caroline. We're going to do a cardinal today that you can make into a Christmas card if you would like to. The photo is by Denise McQuillan, and I've taken the background. Ruth Marsden-Butts did the photograph that I used for the background for the sort of out of focus snowy background. So thanks to both of those photographers, and we'll need some red paint. Any nice bright red paint that you have. Cadmium red is great, but Pyrrole red, cadmium scarlet, all of those things, really good. And let's get busy. Oh, I forgot to say, you'll need some table salt to do the snow as well. So get those things ready and let's paint. Okay, so I've got all my little bits and pieces here, and my little sticker, I've just put mine on with a little bit of masking tape for scanning it. I put it on my scanner because I'm going to make multiple cards. So if you don't want to, put it right over your painting, but you did want to maybe scan it for making cards, just put it on with a little bit of masking tape. This is it after it's been scanned. So let's zoom in a little bit. So this is just scanned. There's no sticker on here. It was the scanned image, and this is just printed on a very lightweight card. It's not even watercolor paper. This one is watercolor paper, and this was the first one I tried, and I thought the bird was much too small. There's way too much background here, and I decided the bird needed to be bigger. Of course, what did I do with my, oh, here it is. One of the original photos, the bird was fairly small in the photo. And then Denise's photo, it was much bigger, and I think it gets a little bit lost in this one. Somebody will get this as a Christmas card. That's okay, I'm not going to waste it. And I put them on some different colors. But whatever you want to do, that's up to you. I'm doing mine a little bit bigger so that I can scan them and they look much better when they're scanned down inside. So let's try out the technique for the salt before we start. I have lots of Canson XL cheap paper here. Actually, no, this is Michael's cheap paper. We'll go over what makes the salt work really well. Now we're going to be wetting our background before we put the color in, so we've got to do it exactly as we're going to do it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of this paper and wet it as if we're going to make the card. And I think that cerulean blue looked better. I tried it with the grey. You can use grey and cerulean if you want, but I really think the cerulean looks more snowy. So I'm going to use mostly cerulean, and get a little bit of that. Now, when you're putting wet paint on wet paper, you don't want your paint to be very wet, if you understand what I mean. I've just got a wet brush. I'm not putting much water with the paint. I'm not putting any water in my palette because we've already got water on the paper. And then I'm going to put my paint onto the wet paper. If we put too much water, we're never going to get ready for the salt. Now, because this is cheap paper, very, very cheap paper, I'm going to have to do a little bit of spreading out with my brush. It's not like the cotton paper. And we might want to use it. I've got just Payne's grey. You might want to use a little bit of grey around the head of the bird. Again, don't put too much water on your paper. Adding that to the blue. Now, when we do the bird, we're going to just be very, very loose. I'm not sort of connecting the brush strokes or anything. Now, let me zoom in a little bit more again. No, that's going the wrong way. Now, if I tip this towards the light, you can see it is very, very shiny, which means if I put salt on at this point, the salt is not going to do very much work. What we need to wait for is how it is just here. Now, just here, it's going kind of a light sheen rather than a wet shine. And when it has that light sheen to it, that's when it will accept the salt. So I'm going to tip a little bit of salt into the palm of my hand because I don't want to go wild. I'm going to take a little pinch like I was making stew, and it's too wet down here, but I'm just going to sprinkle it lightly on that top part that's starting to get that sheen to it. And when we're doing the actual painting, you need to be stopping and watching for that, because we're also going to add some, forgotten the name of what it's called, blue, phthalo blue, it's called phthalo blue. There you go, brain, it's working. Under the bird down here and in the shadows, we're going to add a little bit of phthalo blue to the snow shadows down here on dry paper. So we can be doing that while you're keeping an eye on your wash up the top. Now I'm looking at mine, and just here and here it's drying up a little bit, starting to lose its wet sheen. It has very wet sheen at the bottom here. And I'm going back to the under the bird. I'm going to add a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to my phthalo blue to make a lilac shadow. And under the bird, wet in wet into the phthalo blue, we're going to be putting a little bit of lilac shadow. That's the phthalo blue with the Quinacridone Rose, or you can mix it with cobalt, it doesn't matter, they're both pretty. Or even the cerulean, they're all pretty. And the reason we have the violet under the bird is because the red of the bird's feathers is reflecting on the snow. And even in the photo, if I grab the photo, before I grab the photo, I'm going to look at my paint, and I'm going to add a little bit more salt before I look at the photo. You have to really keep an eye on it. You can't forget it. You can't like leave it right to the end and then put snow on, because most of it will be too dry, or if you do it straight away, everything's going to be too wet. So you have to be vigilant while you're painting, and there's no, no rush. Now let's look at the photo and look at what I'm talking about. I'm talking about here under the bird, you've got the red bird reflecting on the grey blue snow, and that's making a light purple reflection. And we can just take that and times it by 2 and just make it a little bit more purple so that we have a more painterly look. And we can also bring it, see under the tail here, a little bit of grey shadow. We can also bring that lilac kind of out and under the tail when we do the shadows. This little sort of part in the snow here is very, very dark. We're not going to go that dark. We don't need to go as dark as the photo, but you can see that this is a very cool blue, like a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue, very, very cool. And of course this photo doesn't have anything in the background, any snow, but this one had all the kind of grey in the background in the snow, and I just found the grey too boring. You can do grey if you like. I'm not a grey girl. I don't particularly use very much grey. I like to have some colour in the picture. So now when we put the salt on, you can see mine is starting to form snow crystals here. We can't go straight to the hairdryer because it is going to require a little bit of time to work. So we're going to have to sort of just leave it for a few minutes until we see the salt working before we can dry that on the hairdryer. Because let me just grab my good copy here. When we start painting the bird, we're going to start right here with the beak. So we definitely, and the head, so we definitely want to make sure that this area right here is dry before we carry on painting the bird. And when you go to the hairdryer, knowing that, you can just focus your hairdryer just here, just to make sure this is dry enough that we get this lovely crisp edge to the bird. Okay, so that's your little practice. I think it's really good to practice any little technique like this before we start. And mine is still Still just working on making the snowdrops. And it will work easier. If you're using cotton paper, it's going to work much easier. This very cheap paper is hard to work on. And the colours it works best on are the colours that don't stain. Such we're using the Cerulean, doesn't stain, the Cobalt doesn't stain. I used a little bit of Payne's Grey, it doesn't stain too much. The Quinacridone Rose and the Phthalo Blue do stain, so we're using those down here in the snow. That doesn't need much in the way of salt. I really find that when you're doing small animals, dogs, birds, all that kind of thing, you need more space to work on. They require quite a bit of space. And when we start, and we're going to put in the background, we're just going to wet, we're going to be very careful not to wet the bird. We're just going to wet the top, which would you maybe call the sky. We're not going to wet the snow down under the bird. And I want to go very, very carefully around the bird's head. I don't want lots of blue coming into where I'm going to paint red. That wouldn't be good. You don't even have to touch the bird because you can touch the bird with your paint. Now we're wetting the paper first so that you don't get hard edges in the background. You want a very soft out of focus background. This is all out of focus, and you do that by having it wet before you put any paint down. And you need to tip it. Oh, there's a little big area here as I tipped it that's still dry. Make sure you leave all this snow dry down here. Just making sure I've got everything wet. You don't want it dripping wet. It shouldn't be dripping, but you should tip it and make sure it's all shiny. So you're going to get those lovely soft edges. Now I've got my Cerulean blue. A big brush. I have my number 10 brush in my hand because I don't want it to be fiddly. And not too much water on your brush, remember. And don't make patterns with your paintbrush. You know, this way, that way. Just where it goes up to the bird, you need to be really, really careful. Use the point of the brush. You don't need to go right to the edge. You can have what's called a vignette look, where your blue doesn't go up to the edge. I'm going into the little Payne's Grey and blue now, just as I get closer to the bird, because I want it to stand out, especially close to the beak. I'm just going to put a little bit of Payne's Grey with blue there. And maybe up here. Add a little bit of Payne's Grey to my Cerulean blue. Have a little bit darker behind the head. I want the head to really stand out against the background. Now I'm being fairly careful, but I can't be too slow because I've got to keep an eye out for when it's going to be ready for the salt, and I don't want my background to dry before I get the rest of that paint on. So I'm going a little bit of Payne's Grey and blue again, just have a little variety. Just grabbing that, especially near the white snow, it helps accentuate it. Back to the Cerulean blue. And I'm tipping to look. This top edge here, right here, is starting to dry. So get the salt in my hand. And let's just work it up here first. Sprinkle, just gently. You don't want to dump great big amounts of salt on. The goal is, if you do it properly, the salt will completely dissolve in the water and disappear. You won't have to brush any salt off later. I mean, you probably will have to brush a bit off because nothing is perfect. I'm tipping it and it's going kind of satin in the middle here. So I can put a little bit of salt there. It's still Still quite wet at the other end. I kind of want to take it out here to the edge. I've just missed the edge a little bit there. Tip it, yeah, it's definitely satiny here. Don't wait till it's too dry, because nothing will work if it's too dry. And wetting it first gives you not only a soft look, but a bit of extra working time. And like I say, don't overdo it. Don't oversalt the soup. Yeah, I think I've got the salt in there, not too much of it. The salt will help blur the background too. Let's just come out a little bit. And I'm going to tip the rest of the salt in my garbage can. Get rid of that. And all of this bottom here is still dry, and I want to make sure that I brush with a very soft brush. Any salt that's gone down into the snow at the bottom here, I want to make sure and the bird, I want to make sure I get rid of that. I don't want any salt down there. It'll mess up what we're going to do. So just a soft brush and we'll get rid of the salt from there. You will think the salt's going to do nothing, and then all of a sudden it will start to do its thing. Right, I've lost the lid of my salt, don't know where that's gone. Then I'll wait a few minutes for you to catch up. I grab my reference photo. And the next thing we'll be doing is some shadow under the bird with the phthalo blue and a mix of phthalo blue and rose. Now have a look at this mix. Very, very, very light and watery. We're not making deep purple or anything. We're making a very, very light watery violet. So the next two things I need is some, still my number 10 brush. I want nice bold wash. I'm going to get some phthalo blue. It's a lovely cool blue for snow. It's a strong staining color, so I want to water it down. And then I'm going to make some more of that violet for the shadow under the bird. So phthalo blue and a little bit of quinacridone rose, too much. Now that was just a tiny bit I grabbed and it's way too much. I'm going to have to take a little bit more phthalo blue. Take it down until we get a nice soft violet. And add water so it's not too strong. Right, I've gone too blue now. I just want to add the quinacridone rose is so strong. I have to be really, really careful with that. There, add a little bit more rose to get just a warmer color. And I usually have a piece of cheap watercolor paper here to just test it out. It's a sort of a grey. I can even test it out next to this one. It looks exactly like that one, sort of a pinky grey colour. And about this watery. And then I'm going to work on dry paper for the snow under the bird, and quick and loose. Quick and loose, you don't want to be fussing with this. So a big number 10 brush. I'm going to put in some shadow under here, under the bird. I'm doing just the phthalo blue first. I'm going to do some wet in wet. I'm not going to wash this brush. I'm going to take my number 8 brush and get some clean water on that one. So I got a damp brush and a brush with colour on. And this snow here, I want to soften the edge of that with this slightly damp brush. Just soften it in to the snow. I'm going to put a little bit more back here. trust your brush strokes. You know, you don't have to look at the picture. You don't have to make them exact. You just need to have a lovely soft shadow in the snow. A little bit more. And I'm using my other brush that's just damp to just work those colors in. And I want to go this snow under the bird here. And of course we're going to put the lilac in wet as well. Down here. Where that really dark divot is, I'm just going to make that fairly light. I'm not going to make it really dark. Damp brush, I'm not going to leave those hard edges. Going to soften those in, drag them out a bit. See, I take my damp brush and I actually extend those shadows by pulling them out from where I put them with the damp brush. Now I'm going to wash my big brush, dry it on my sponge. I have a sponge here which can take a lot of the moisture out of your brush, and grab that lilac color that I made. And this is where I want to do wet. Now, because I did this bit here first and it will be drying quicker than the other part, I want to make sure that I tap that in. I'm tapping it in with the point of my brush. And then under the bird here, going to grab the tiniest bit more Quinacridone rose on my brush, just the tiniest bit, because under here it looks a little bit more pink. And the shadow under the tail, there's a slightly white edge between the tail and the shadow, and there's also, I'm going to grab a little bit more phthalo blue and let that run into the lilac that I just made. And take my damp brush, my other brush, just to extend that out a little bit. And that's really all you need. Don't overdo it. You want this snow at the front, at the foreground, to be really white. We're going to have the lovely red bird on that. Now, can you see the salt is starting to do its thing? We've got snowflakes everywhere from that little bit of salt, looking very snowy. So I'm quite happy with how they are forming. Even this cheap piece of paper is doing quite well. It stays really wet here because of the more shininess of the paper. The cotton paper is very absorbent, so the water soaks in. Now I think mine has just about, it's quite fairly dry, and I think the salt has done all it can do, or all I want it to do. So at this point I'm going to dry mine ready for the next step while you complete your snow washes and things. And don't belabor the snow wash down here. If you do too much, you'll have too many brush strokes. So just, you know, just keep it small. One thing I don't like about mine here, I have a ragged edge and rather than a soft edge here. And before I go to the hairdryer, I'm going to get my damp brush. I'm going to try and fix this ragged edge here. I don't like it. So damp brush, and I'm going to agitate that edge. And sorry, and I'm going to just, I'll get a little background, but it doesn't matter. It's all kind of like, but a little bit more in there, maybe a little bit more color. I didn't like how that edge went. We can always, when this is dry, if you feel the shadow's too light, always put more on. It's difficult to take some off. So I will mute my microphone so that the hairdryer doesn't hurt your ears, and then I'm going to dry mine. Now again, I used a soft brush to just brush away any little random grains of salt so they don't get into any of my other washes. Don't use your fingers because your fingers will smear things and they will also put oil on your paper. Even if you've just washed your hands, you'll have enough oil residue on your fingers to make oil prints on your paper that will resist your paint. And if you're anything like me, I'm super messy. I always smear paint or pencil or something or ink into everything. So I try to be really careful about that. Right, mine's ready for the next stage for doing the head and other parts of the birds. I'm going to check in with you and see how ready you are at the moment. You might be hair drying, so I'll give you time to do that. The two colors we're going to be working with when we start on the bird, we're going to be using a nice bright red. It doesn't matter if you use cadmium red, pyrrole red, quinacridone red, scarlet lake. I'm trying to think of some other reds you might use. They're all pyrrole scarlet. They're all good. They're all bright. I found that the alizarin crimson was quite a good one for making the darker feathers, but if you don't have alizarin crimson, you can put a little bit of cobalt with the red to make it that crimson color. You can put a little bit of magenta with it to make it that crimson color. I think I sent on your handout like many different mixes that are possible to use. I just usually just go with the best one that I can find. Despite the fact I said I was not going to buy cadmium red again, I did because I love it. And I got the M. Graham's cadmium red, and it's just, there's nothing else like it. I haven't found anything else like cadmium red. All the other reds are very beautiful, but they just don't seem to have that beautiful, strong red color to them that you need. So I broke down and bought an M. Graham cadmium red. But my pyrrole red's pretty good too. When we do the beak, we're just going to use red by itself, but when we do the head and the breast of the bird, we're going to put yellow on first and work into it wet on wet, because the yellow underneath the red makes it glow more. The red can look very dead and dull by itself. It dries quite a bit lighter, and the yellow underneath, and I don't know if you can see on here, I've got kind of yellow showing through here and here. It gives those lovely sort of golden highlights and brightens up the red. So if I'm doing anything red, I usually put the yellow on underneath. I'm seeing how you all are. Some people are watching, some people are painting. I'm gonna get my red paint ready. Get my colors ready here. So let's grab my warm colors tray. My warm colors tray got mostly my reds and yellows in. A friend gave me some tubes of paint to try. This is a Daniel Smith Indian yellow. It's rather lovely. I've never ever tried it before, ever. Not. Where's my little piece of? I don't know where anything goes once I get started. Anyway, let's grab this piece of paper. I'm just going to put this Indian yellow. Of course, it's not genuine Indian yellow. Genuine Indian yellow is not allowed to be made anymore. They force-fed cows in India, I think it was mangoes, and collected the urine, which was very, very yellow, and then dried it, and that made Indian yellow. But now they make it with pretty much the same pigments they use for the azo yellow, the yellow pigment 150 and 151. And beside it here, this is beside the Daniel Smith Indian yellow is my M. Graham azo yellow. It's just a tiny bit brighter. The Indian yellow is a little bit darker, but it's still a rather beautiful color. I just squirted a bit from the tube my friend lent me to try in there. Anyway, I got distracted. I'll use combination. I've got some Indian yellow here. I'll put my azo yellow with it and have some yellow ready to go. Not too wet. And then I want to put my cadmium red in this one. This is my nice new M. Graham cadmium red. And I also have my Perol red here, which is just as nice, really. I'll put that there. And while I'm just getting paint ready, I'm going to put some cadmium red mixed with alizarin crimson here to make a darker red. Let's get my mixing tray where you can see it. That was just some of the darker one there. And we will be probably mixing in a little bit of cobalt blue, or ultramarine too is good, to darken it up a little bit more as we go along. Any of the blues to darken it up is fine. I'll get myself organized. Now, because I'm going to start with the beak, I need a much smaller brush, a little detail brush. I'm going to go for my number 1. It's a 0. I've got a 0 and a number 2 here. So 0 and number 2 brushes. I'm going to start with the 0 because what I want to do is I want to try and just leave white paper where the snow is on the beak. So it's going to take some close work, some close detailed work. If I lose some, it's okay. I have my Dr. P.H. Martin's white here that I can put it on with afterwards, but it does look so nice if you can leave it when you paint. And if you look at the little bird here, it's got some snow on its beak. So I've got this right in front of me, so I can sort of see the red shapes. I'm going to just use my cadmium red and my 0 brush. And the top beak is fairly clear of snow. So let's start with the top of the beak, where it's fairly clear of the snow. And of course it goes black into the black feathers here, and we can make black feathers over the beak. Because it's against the snow, I kind of want to have a strong color against the snow so that the snow really stands out. So I'm going very, very slowly doing this beak, and I'm trying to form the shapes that I see coming down into the snow. I want to, with the red, I definitely want to come out and have that point of the beak at the end, even if it's not in the photo. Sometimes when you're painting, you have to be more explicit than the photo. And then I'm really, really got to keep an eye on the shapes that I'm leaving. It doesn't have to be exact, but it sure helps if you can use what you've got there to guide you. We don't need to worry about the division between the top beak and the lower beak at the moment. We're going to put that in with dark paint later on. So we're just going to paint it as if it's all one beak at the moment. And I'm doing the biggest parts of the beak first. Now the nice thing with watercolor paint is if you feel it's too dark, you can lift some off later. There's a little bit of pink A little bit of beak showing through the snow here. Just gonna, a little bit showing through. And like I say, if you feel like I feel that the top is maybe too thickly painted, I got a wet brush and I can lift a little bit off and put a little bit of highlight on the top of the beak. With paint, when you're painting something small like this, it's always easier to put on full color and then lift off than try and put on half color and put deeper color in wet. That's tricky. I'm just lifting a little bit off on the top of the beak there. And all of these colors, especially the red, they dry quite a bit lighter. A little bit of a highlight under there, so we'll get that in. And that's my work with my little tiny zero brush, which I just bought. I'm very, very happy with it. It's beautiful, fine brush, has a beautiful point on it. My number 2 brush is a little bit older and it's getting a little bit, I don't know, when it's wet it's okay. It's getting a little bit more fraught than this nice brand new number 1 brush. And let's pop that over there. Now, when I'm working on the head and the chest, I need slightly bigger brushes. I think for the head of the bird, I'm going to use my number 4 brush, but I'm going to keep my number 0 handy, because when I come up to these feathers at the crest of the head here, I want to use my very fine brush to bring those feathers up. But if I use my very fine brush for this whole head, it's going to take too long to paint, and it's going to be too bitty. You're going to have lots and lots of teeny weeny bitty brush strokes. So what we want is more of a wet look for the forehead, and then switch to the fine brush to take the crest feathers back. So I'm switching to my number 4 brush for now, and I'm putting the yellow on the forehead here. And my yellow's it's not too wet. It's not dry. I'm not painting with dry paint because I want it to be wet, but it's not too wet. And whenever I'm painting a bird, I make sure that my brush strokes go in the direction of the feathers at all times. So if you see a brush stroke, it's always going to be going in the direction of the feathers. And then I'm going to take my cadmium red on my number 4 brush and put the head in, but I'm just going to let those colors blend wet. At the moment, there's a crease in here. I'm just taking it to there for the moment. It's a useful stopping point so I can control the paint. And now I'm going to my 0 brush, and I'm going to pull those. I'm making sure I roll my 0 brush in plenty of paint, and I'm just painting with the tip of it. And I'm going to take those crest feathers out. I'm rolling it in paint again. I want them to be nice, and I don't want them to be what's the word? Sparse. I don't want them sparse. I want them nice, juicy paint. And take those out and down the back of the head of the bird. You can see I've got a few little white spaces left where the paper shows through. It doesn't matter. Those are little highlights. And I'm just letting my brush go over the edge sometimes, so that I've got just like the stray feather here and there. If you look closely at the photo, there is a stray feather here and there. Don't do too many. If you do too many stray feathers, it looks silly. And that's the back of the head. Now I'm going to do the same thing as I come around the cheek here. And this line here is okay because I'm going to put a dark line in there later. So I don't have to worry about having a dry against wet there. I'm still going to put the yellow on first. Makes a big difference to your color. It's not very wet. I don't want puddles. I want puddles of paint. Number 4 brush still for these. I'm grabbing my cadmium red. And getting the cheek feathers in. And I've got my little tiny zero brush. I'm just doing a little bit of feather work. We don't need too much feather work on the body because it's going to be all kind of one color, but the places you will have feather work is anytime you're coming along the edge of the body, the edge of the head. That's when they really look lovely, if you can put some little feathers sticking out. Now I'm going to switch to my number 6 brush. If you don't have all these sizes, it doesn't matter. Just giving you what I'm doing. If you don't have them, you grab something that's as useful to you as can be. But I'm going to the chest of the bird now, so I've got a little bit more space to fill in. And if you have a tiny brush, it takes too long to fill in that space. And it can dry, and then you can get wet against dry lines, which are not good. Now I have the yellow still. I've got my yellow here. I'm adding a little bit of water to it because it's kind of drying on my palette. So just bring it over so you can see what I'm doing. I wet my number 6 brush. I got a bit more yellow. Just added a little bit more here because I don't want to be working with dry paint, but I don't want it too wet either. I'm going to put in the chest. And it doesn't matter if the reference photo isn't exactly like this. We're artists, and other reference photos will look like this. I'm putting in that yellow before I put the red on. Wash my number 6 brush, grab my cadmium red. And it can't be too wet. It certainly can't be wetter than the yellow, otherwise you're going to get a big mess happening. If you're doing watercolor, the amount of water you mix with your paint and the amount of water you put on your paper are absolutely critical. And it's always dangerous to put wetter paint over drier paint. It should be drier paint over wetter paint. So I'm again going in the direction of the bird's feathers. I'm going to do the little feathers after I've got the big amount on. And doing most of the chest. Down into the snow. Now I mixed up that alizarin crimson with the cadmium red, and you can use rose if you like, or you can use magenta with the red, or even a little bit of cobalt blue. And I'm just going into a slightly darker red as I come under here, close to the snow and under the body. And now I'm switching to my little brush because just here they're very, very light and feathery. And before anything dries too much, I need to go back and do these lovely little Whoops, that's too big. I need to pick my brush up so that it's the point of the brush is what's working for me. And just really, really carefully and lightly flick those feathers out. And this one here really was a big blob, and I have to try and make that into a thinner feather. Not a great big blob. And then coming out here, these ones here come over the wing feathers, just here. Again, I have some little bits of white showing. That's great because if you look on the photo, there's kind of shininess from the feathers making very light spots. So I'm not making a fuss about it. I'm not trying to do it particularly well. I'm just kind of randomly leaving a few little white spots. Now I've got just at the back of the head here to do, and then we're going to be doing the body in a darker red. Oh, let's see, what brush do I want for the back of the head? That's a good question. Too many choices, really. Let's try the number 2 brush. Now for the back of the head, I'm actually just going to take a little bit of red and yellow. It's a very small area, and I'm just going to mix them together first rather than do a wet and wet. It's lovely to vary what you do when you paint. Vary your colors just a little bit, vary your techniques just a little bit. And I'm just going to do those other feathers on the neck. And I think the number 2 brush is good because I do want to leave a few little white highlights that are white paper just showing through. And then I'm gonna switch to my darker red, the one that has the alizarin crimson in it, and I'm just going to go darker just here. And I'm going to grab my 0 brush because I just want a few little wispy feathers coming off the back of the neck here. And fill that in a little bit. I'm going to pull back because you're looking up very close, and sometimes when you're looking very close you kind of don't see the whole picture. I'm looking just here and I have a little bit of a line, so it's still wet. I'm taking my tiny, I'll zoom in again, I just want to use the whole picture. I'm taking my little tiny 0 brush and I'm using the point to make a feathery line between the paint here. Where I had dark paint against light paint, I want to feather the line so it looks a little bit more natural. Now you can see the back of the bird here is much more dark and violet looking. So we can use a number of different mixes for that. I'll show you them. Here on these wing feathers here, it's a little bit more bright red. So we could actually, right now while we have the bright red on the palette, we could put some of these areas in here with the bright red. And it's going to be absolutely impossible to get these light areas on the back in watercolor. It's the kind of thing that you put on in oil paint after you put on the light, it's of light blue actually, you'd put it on afterwards after you put the red on. You would need to be doing a very big painting in watercolor to be able to leave those lines. So I think if you wanted to have those kind of lines on there, it's best to do those when it's all finished. Mix a little bit of P.H. Martin's white with a little bit of blue and put them on, or just don't even bother about them. Where's the other picture? If you look at this picture, they don't show up in this one. They're not going to show up in every picture. They don't have to show up in your watercolor. So I don't think we should fuss about them. They're going to be way too fussy in a small painting like this. Even these borders like here, I think they're best done later with a little bit of P.H. Martin's white, not pure white, because this is not pure white. It's more this bluey gray color here. It's, if you look at the pure white next to it here, this is quite a lot bluer and darker. So even leaving white paper is going to look a bit too stark. So what did I say? I said we have some red paint, so I want to put these wing feathers in all as one color right now, because we can come back with dark and put the divisions in. So I've got my cadmium red. I'm not going to bother with, mixing yellow with it just for these wings. And gotta try and see where they come. I think I want a little bit more paint. There we go. They come down in this direction. What I can do is I can use the tip of my brush to get those other feather shapes that they come from under here. There is black under this big feather here. We can put that over the top of the red. That'll be perfectly fine. And the tail feathers are more of that dark red. That's what I mixed with the Alizarin crimson and the cadmium red to get a darker red. Let's put a bit more in there. A bit more cadmium red and Alizarin crimson. And my number 4 brush. And I'm going to take the tail feathers out here. Oh, a little bit too thick on my brush. I just got to take a little bit of water and thin that out a little bit. A little bit of the bird's here underneath too. His little, just under there. And we're going to fill a lot of that in with dark feathers too. When you get to this area of the wings and the feathers, it's hard to make sense of everything you're looking at. So I'm just doing the fluffy feathers under here, under the wings. And then we're going to come in with some slightly darker ones. Grab my zero brush. I don't know if you can see, as the wing color is fading and drying, it's really, really fading out. Just a little bit extra water with it really fades that color out. And of course that doesn't have the yellow underneath, so it fades out even more. Just having the yellow underneath stops that kind of red fading to a more pink color as it dries. And then I have to remember what I typed. So I'm looking at my notes and I say for the back of the wings and the tail, I've used cadmium red with phthalo blue or cadmium red and alizarin crimson. Now I've used the cadmium red and alizarin crimson here, and it's not really dark enough for the back of the bird. And I think you can either use phthalo blue or cobalt blue for the darker color on the back. I think when I went in, I might have started with the alizarin crimson, but then I think I went in with a slightly darker layer afterwards. And it's quite dark up here. And every dark you put in makes the light look lighter. So don't be afraid of going a little bit dark. And I'm looking at this one. And up here under the neck, it's pretty dark. And this is a really violety red here. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of my blue from over here, phthalo blue, and I'm going to paint the eye with that, because I want the highlight in the eye to be phthalo blue and not white. It's a very watery phthalo blue. My zero brush again. I don't know what I did without this zero brush. I don't know how no, it's not. It's my number 2 brush. Well, I guess I used my number 2 brush. That's what I did without it. But I have been loving my little zero brush, which I should have used for the eye. And then I have to mix up a darker color for the back of the bird. I'm not going to waste what I have here. I have the cadmium red and alizarin crimson here already. I'm going to get a little bit of phthalo blue. I'm going to have to be very careful with the phthalo blue because it's very strong. And I've just mixed a tiny, tiny bit of that phthalo blue with the red and the crimson, and I think that is dark enough already. I'm just going to test it on my paper here. It's a very, very browny red. And then I'm going to, what I like to do is I like to fold my picture and then lay it alongside of what I've just made. And actually, if you look under the wings here, they are quite blue, quite dark. I think that's going to be okay. I might want to put a little bit of blue shading in after. I have my, let's grab under the camera, have my phthalo blue here, and I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it to make a darker purple in case I just want some darker shadows. Let's see, let's just see, compare. I'm going to put, I have rose in this one here, so I'm going to put that there and add a little bit of rose. Can be intense, that's why I kind of have gone to the crimson and grab a little bit of rose. And I've got a bit of rose next to it. Now what I kind of like about the alizarin crimson, because it is more orangey, not very orangey, but a bit more, it's making more of a grey colour, whereas the rose, because the rose is so cool and so beautiful, it's making more of a very, very beautiful purple colour. Both of them are useful, but I think that the more grey colour that the crimson makes is more useful. Let's just put the See, they're quite different when you put them next to each other. This is the Alizarin Crimson with the Phthalo Blue, and this is the Quinacridone Rose with the Phthalo Blue. Both useful. I want to try one more. I want to try the Cadmium Red with the Phthalo Blue. So I'm going to put the Phthalo Blue here. And just got it now. Cadmium Red is a very warm red, so it makes more of a grey. It's like mixing orange and blue. It's like mixing complements. So we're going to get a more grey colour. Add some water to that. See how very quickly that goes grey? A bit more blue. Let's try a little bit more red in it. Okay, there we go. We've got a dark, reddy grey colour, and let's try that. You can see how much more grey that looks than the other colour that I mixed. So I think that's why the Alizarin Crimson is a good one for this. But if you use a cobalt blue, you're going to get something different again, because cobalt is much more warm. It's kind of neutral, but it's more warm than phthalo. So let's put a little bit of cobalt here. And let's try a little bit of Alizarin Crimson with that and see what we get. I'll test that here. That's gorgeous too. That's really lovely. So if you're finding that you don't like your phthalo blue with the crimson or the rose, try the cobalt, because the cobalt might be better for you, might work better. I've got lots of colours mixed up now that are very useful. So I've got to do these feathers on the back of the bird. Go back to my number 4 brush. And sometimes, what brush is this? This is a number 6. I don't know if I want to go bigger or smaller at this point. I don't want to fiddle around too much. I think I'm going to go with my number 6. And I'm going to work wet in wet, 2 colours at a time. I'm going to put some, I've just got cadmium red, and like I said, you can't worry about all those highlights on the back. I've got this cadmium red, and I'm going to put that on first, because at the back of the bird here is definitely more red. And then I'm going to switch to my number 4 brush now. Put that one out of the way, and I'm going to go to my crimson and phthalo blue mix. And I'm going to put in some of these darker areas. Wet in wet. Let's grab my 0 again, because what I want to do is poke that dark with the point of my 0 brush. I want to poke it into that lighter paint so that it looks like those feathers are coming over the dark and under this, under here. And the key is to get your color on first, fairly wet, and then use your little brush to put those details in. And don't wait too long, because you're going to you'll get a line where the paint stops, and you don't want that. Now, at this point, I'm switching back and forth between colours, because there's a sort of a feather coming down the back here that's a lighter red than the dark, and I am not worried about them just mixing wet in wet. because it's a watercolor painting. You don't have to make it look like a photograph. And then this, a little bit more water on my brush because this feather's lighter, and this feather coming down here in the wing is a lighter red. And we can make the divisions between them after they're dry. And as they come along, they get darker. So I've done the cadmium red here. And I'm going to get the darker paint we mixed up as the feathers come down here. A little bit of the dark on the top of them. Now I need to mix up a little bit more of my dark alizarin crimson that has a little bit of phthalo blue in it, just a little bit. Doesn't have a lot in, otherwise you're going to be too dark purple. And I'm coming under here now, under the feathers here. Again, little brush so I can poke it in under the light feathers to make them look like they're coming over the top of these darker ones. Work slowly so that you find your way and don't get lost with what you're doing. And put a little bit over the top of that red there. Now just under here, just right here, I should have left it nice and light there. It's like a phthalo blue color just there. I'm going to put it over the top. I should have left some space for it. You can't always plan for everything. That's why you have to do more than one painting, but I'm going to put some of that phthalo blue just over the top of the red there. I've got to grab enough of it so it's going to show up. And I'm just painting that little area there just with phthalo blue. And I'm putting a little bit, oops, see what happens if you wash your brush and you don't dry it after you wash it, you get a big water bubble. I'm going to put a little bit of dark here. And dark up under the wing. The wing's going to be quite black there, so I'm just going to put some dark underneath. And I just have these two over the top here to do. And then a lot of these are going to be quite dark, quite black. So I'll do those in a moment. I think I can take that red down a little bit further, like that. And then wash and then dry. I dry my brush on a sponge. If I forget, that's when I get water drips. So these two feathers coming back here, I'm going to start with the cadmium red mixed with a little bit of the yellow. This one and this one. And then I'm going to get the darker colour while that's still wet, and put a little bit of that darker colour on there while it's still wet. I'll do some wet in wet. Just work with the tip of your brush. Don't need to do a lot of painting, it's more just dropping paint down. Now I mixed up some quite dark purpley mixes when I was experimenting over there with different paints and mixes. And I'm going to take one of the darker ones right now, and I'm going to go in a little bit darker up here. Actually, I'm going to mix, I had this dark one here, which was the cadmium red and the phthalo blue, and I'm going to mix a little bit of Payne's grey in with that. I want to darken it up a little bit more. If you don't have Payne's grey, use ultramarine blue, or use a brown, dark brown, anything to just darken up that mix a little bit, because I just want to go in up here and just under the cheek here, little tiny zero brush, and we're putting some little dark accents on. Now they're not as dark as the black, but they are just slightly darker. Wash my brush, dry it off, and just use my very slightly damp brush to just pull those into like feather shapes. And the other place is a slight darkness is just close to the eye here. Now I don't want it too dark. I'm just going to use the red and the alizarin crimson, just not really dark. I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow in here for that little crease and kind of around the eye, just like it's almost like a little, I guess there's a little eye socket there, and it's kind of makes the feathers a little darker, and especially as they come off of the face here, just a little bit darker. Just little details like that, they just add a little bit of depth to your painting. And even here, I add a little bit of, just a little bit of feathering here and there with that slightly darker color. Grab a little bit more on the tip of my brush and add a little bit, very light. I'm just really just tickling the paper with the tip of my number 0 brush to give a little bit of feathering. And under here, where it comes down to the snow here, a little bit darker. If at any time you feel those lines are too distinct, you can get your slightly wet brush and you can just agitate them in a little bit if you think, oh, they're just a little bit too standy, they stand out too much. Wet brush, dried off a little bit, and then just use that damp brush to just soften them in a little bit. This is a little bit more dry now. The one I dripped on, I'm going to put a little bit more of that blue just here. So we're at the point now we're going to mix a nice dark black for some of the black areas. I'm going to check in with you and see how you're doing. Just pull back a little bit. Give my brushes a good wash. I don't think I need clean water at the moment because I'm going to go black. So I won't get clean water until I need to do the white snow. So when I said when I did the black face, you can use Payne's Grey and Phthalo Blue, or you could use lamp black if you like. I don't use black very often, but I did do a painting that was just in lamp black, nothing else, and I have a little lamp black here, and it does, I mean, that works. If you just want a little black area like this and you have something like a lamp black, then that's fine. I just have always been one that I like mixing my dark colors, but if you find that too tricky, then use a black. You may not have one because I never ever have it on my paint list. I am going to mix one because that's what I like to do. I have just here I've got some ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, so I'm just going to make use of that. There's no reason not to use it. I'll wet it up again. I can't remember what I used it for now. Something I was doing recently probably. Anyway, we'll wet that up. We'll get some Payne's Grey is almost black. It's just a little bit light for strong black areas. Let's put a little bit of Payne's Grey down. And let's put a little bit of Phthalo Blue with it. Of course, we don't want much water because it won't be strong. And I mean, that's making a pretty blue black. I think because we've got a red bird, we want to add, I haven't put it in my notes, but I'm going to add a little bit of the alizarin crimson to that black I'm mixing just to make it harmonize with all the colors we've used in the bird. Grab a little bit more Payne's Grey. And then get my test paper and see if that's black enough. Well, that looks pretty black to me. And I think that's going to be fine. Now I will show you what lamp black looks like next to that. I'm going to grab some of that lamp black. Lamp black's not, it's fairly transparent, it's not that dark. So I'm going to paint the lamp black next to it. There's not a lot of difference. The nice thing is when you mix your colors and they dry, you can kind of, or if they separate in the water, you kind of get that look of all the beautiful colors that you've mixed when they separate in the water, whereas the lamp black just looks like grey. And that's one of the good things about it, is if you just want to use it by itself, you can water it down to many greyish colors, which can be make an interesting painting. But I'm going to stick with my mix, but there's not a lot of difference. So you do what you're comfortable with, and I'll go over that mix again. It was mostly Payne's Grey, and then I added in quite a bit of Phthalo Blue because that's a transparent strong blue, and because we are using red on the bird, I grabbed some alizarin crimson and I put some of that in it too. You could also use magenta. Magenta would look good in it, and this gorgeous, where's my other tray? I need another tray. This is the Cerulean maroon that I bought, and a lovely transparent maroon color. And that would be good for a lot of the darker colors on the bird. Look at that. You could put some of that Cerulean maroon on there. That would be gorgeous. There's so many colors you can use. You don't have to have them all and you don't have to use them, but they're all useful. Now, Cerulean maroon being very, very dark, strong, intense and transparent is great for mixing dark, so I can mix that with a little bit of Payne's Grey and a little bit of this Phthalo Blue. And already we've got a really transparent, because Phthalo Blue is transparent. Payne's Grey is moderately transparent. So with those three colours, again, look, we've got a lovely, lovely transparent black. And I'll just dilute that out. And that's because it's got the maroon in, that's more of a pinky colour when you wet it out. Now you can see as the lamp black is drying and my mix is drying, the lamp black is going much more just a dull black, whereas my mix is looking more of a sort of a bluey black. And this one is going to look more of a browny reddish black. Oh, whatever you feel like doing, you do it. It's such a small area, we're not going to even worry about it. Pop my black over there. I'm going to need you're going to need a 1 or a 0 brush, a little brush, or even a 2. My 2's pretty good for this because we're going to do the face here. If you're ready. Are you ready for the face? If you're not, don't worry, you'll get to it. But all of this area was painted first. I don't think we need the hairdryer. It should be completely dry or dry enough to put the black feathers in. Now, because we're going with very dark paint, be careful. I have my 0 brush and my dark paint mixed up, and I'm going to just roll it in that paint so it's really full of dark paint. Make sure there's no drips on your brush to dilute that paint. And then we're going to have to be very careful how we paint this. I'm wondering where to start. I feel like starting just at the top of the beak here. Little feathers coming back. And of course these feathers are coming out from the beak, and some of them will go over the top of the red here. So with the tip of my brush, there's a couple of little tiny ones sticking out here. Put those in. Zoom in a little bit more. What I want to do, because I don't want to lean my hand in anything that's going to make a mess, I'm going to put a Kleenex there, or you can put a piece of paper. A Kleenex is better or paper towel, because it will absorb anything that you don't want to get your hand in. And with the point of my brush, this is when I'm going to just do that little division between the top beak and the lower beak. And I'm painting carefully. I'm not going to do the eye all in one go. I'm going to paint around it for the moment. Remember, I put a light coat of phthalo blue, very light diluted phthalo blue on the eye. That's going to be so we have some reflection. Go slowly, take your time. There's no hurry with this, no hurry at all. Remember to use the point of your brush to get those little feathery strokes, and don't overdo them. I don't have them everywhere, but here and there you definitely need a few. The place we really want them is under the beak here, but I want to do that last. I don't want to do it first because I might smush them or make a mess of them or something. So we'll come to those last. And I'll make sure that eye is round. Also, what I like to do is paint until I've got very little paint left on the brush, and that's when you can get very, very thin feathers. But if you go in with a loaded paintbrush, like I did up here, that's when you get a big blob of feathers. So you're better off to do them when the brush is running out of paint than when it's full. Now as it comes down here, this little bit of black. This is where it comes over the red feathers here. Looks so pretty. I think those little feathery tufts look so pretty. A good thing to have, oh, I've got to clean it. Sometimes if you want to get a little bit of that paint off, you can just dab it on a towel or a Kleenex or something so that you don't have too much paint. I took too much off now. Just edge closer and closer to the area where you want to put those feathery parts and get there slowly. And if you want, you can be just a little bit more dramatic than the photo. Add a little bit of drama to that bird. And just under here, we did a little bit of dark under here, but there's a little patch of, it's quite dark just there, and there's a little patch here that's quite dark, so I'm going into those little patches with a bit of black again to add that little bit of drama and contrast. Nothing wrong with that. He looks a bit weird, doesn't he, with his big starey eye. We'll fix that in a minute. And get those. I'm adding just a few little shadows, just tiny little shadows here and there. I want that to dry before I work on the eye. There's other places we can use the black. There's some feathers coming out here. They're quite dark. I'm going to use it here. And then we have the tail feathers. There's a under here, just as it's coming down to the tail. Under the wing. Oh, I'm going to be forming a lot of the wing shapes now as I start to use the dark paint. Under the wing first, under here. And then you can sort of see the dark divisions in the wing. This is when it really helps to have a Kleenex to lean your hand on, because you really, really want to have your hand resting on something so that you don't wobble. And there's a few more dark lines to put in on the wings, but I'm going to just wait to do those in a moment. I want to get the long tail feathers first. Now, I want to use a slightly bigger brush for that. I think my number 2 brush is probably better. And along the top of the tail, it's more purple than black. So I had a nice purple I mixed up here with the rose and the phthalo blue. I had rose and phthalo blue, and I mixed up a little bit of a purple, so I'm going to use that first, my number 2 brush, and start here and pull that along the tail in one motion if I can, and in under the tail here. Now, closer to the wing, that tail is darker, so wet in wet, I'm going to take my 0 brush and I'm going to add a little bit of that dark paint and under here and the tail feathers. Back to the purple, and go back to the purple, and there's some shadow under here, and then to the dark red, not the purple, the dark red, and under here I'm going to use the dark red to do some shading. Now I'm going to wash my brush, dry it off a little bit, and use my damp brush to just soften that shading into the tail. I'm going to take a little bit more red on my brush too and strengthen up that red. I feel it's not strong enough. Red really, really fades when it dries, so I want to just strengthen up that red there. Now this is the fiddly bits here. The wings are really, really fiddly. We've got to sort of I'm going to take the 0 brush and the dark red, not the black, the dark red, and I'm going to start putting a few of these little divisions in between the wing feathers, the point, just with the point of my little brush. And this is even more shadow under here, so I'm just going to add a little bit more shadow. And you see they looked a bit raggedy before we got some of these details in, but once you start putting the details in, they look less raggedy. And I will come back and I'll fill in any color that needs filling in. It's a little bit too white in places, but I'll fill that in when that's dry. I'm going to take the darker purple. This one was the rose and the phthalo blue, and I'm going to do a little bit of shading work. Too much color, a little bit more water with it, so I'm going to add a little bit more water with that. Still my 0 brush. I'm not even going to add a little bit more water. What I'm doing is I'm taking from this one here, which is the Alizarin crimson with the phthalo blue, and I'm taking a little bit of it and I'm mixing it in with the phthalo blue and a rose, so I have a combination of the two, a little bit of one, a little bit of the other, because what I had on my brush was too strong here. I just wanted to do some divisions between these feathers on the back. Just here. And then of course we've got some divisions on the other wing feathers. Quite a lot of wing work to do. Same, I'm taking a little bit of that alizarin crimson one and a little bit of the the lilac one, and then I'm going to put in these divisions here on these wings. And a little bit of shading on here. Don't want to, like I said, we don't have to have a photographic representation. I'm just adding a little bit of dark to this feather. And I have a damp brush. I'm just going to make sure that those edges are not too sharp. I'm just going to sort of try and represent a few little feathers here and there. If you really, really like photorealism and you wanted to do one that was really realistic, it would be much easier to do on a much bigger painting, and then it would probably take you about 20 hours. Like a really detailed painting takes about 20 hours, and lots of layers and lots of attention to detail, and you could make it look photorealistic. I don't think that's necessary for what we're doing. All I've got a little bit of, a little bit of suggestion. That needs to be a little bit darker. A little bit of suggestion of feathers, a little bit of suggestion of darker shadows and shades. And the only thing I need to do is put a little bit more red. Going back to just my cadmium red now. And to put a little bit more red on these feathers here. Now I've got the dark in. Just a little bit more. And all I have to do now is work on the eye. I think the face is dry enough for me with my zero brush to go back into my very dark mix. And what I want to do is I want to, so carefully, I want to leave a highlight and leave a little bit of a border to show the edge of the eye. Now, I don't want that border to be too obvious, so I'm going to fill it in places, because you don't want it too starey. I might lift a little bit afterwards too. You can always lift. That's the great thing about mixing your own blacks too. You know, when you can lift them, you know how to manipulate them if you need to. A little bit more dark just in some of these wing areas. I have a mixture now of the black and the dark red, and I'm just going to add a little bit more dark to some of these areas. The tail. I think that highlight's a little bit too light. I'm just going to manipulate that paint a little bit. Thing is, I'm just lifting a little bit of paint too, so that's going to give the eye a little bit of a glisten. Now let's pull back a little bit so you can see it in total without being too close up. Seeing it too close up is great when you want to see what I'm doing, but it doesn't really give you an idea of how it looks when you see the whole thing, the gestalt of the whole thing. Of course, there comes a point where you just want to fiddle with all of this stuff, and you shouldn't. Someone should come and slap the paintbrush out of my hand. Now at this point, I think I could do with just a little bit more shadow in the snow here now that it's dried. just a little bit of the phthalo blue just under here. I'm going to add in a little bit more shadow here. Maybe here. That's the tiniest bit. It felt like it needed a bit more under the bird. Maybe a little bit more purpley color just under here. It's, you know, it dries so much lighter, and I'm going to take my damp brush again and soften that into the snow. And the eye is drying up a little bit, so I'm just going to lift a little bit with my damp brush, so it's a little bit more shiny and round than the feathers around it. Does my beak need a little bit of shadow? I think it does. I like the beak. See how it looked really dark when I started painting, and I lifted a little bit of it off, and now everything's dried. It looks a little bit too light to me, so I'm going to take my red, just my red, and I'm going to put a little bit of darker red underneath here, just there, just a tiny bit. Damp brush, and just soften that in a little bit. I'll tell you where else there's a little divot, I think, where the nostril is. I should be using my zero brush because I just want to make that little divot here. And give the beak a little bit more shape. I'm just experimenting now. If you wanted the highlights on the back, there's a couple of ways you can do them. Like I said, you can put them in later with some PH Martin's white. You could also try just lifting them out, but I think that's going to look messy. I think that's going to look pretty messy. I'm going to give it a quick whirl with the hairdryer just to make sure it's perfectly dry, because I want to sprinkle some snow on there. So I'll just stop the sound for a minute. That's dried that up. And what I wanted to do was just, I have a number of pastel pencils, different ones, and that's another way you can get some little light, probably an easier way to get some little light feathers on the back. Actually, it's a great way. I'm just experimenting here. This is a General's Charcoal White. I have another General's Charcoal White. I have Watercolour White Chalk. And then I have some of these lovely Stabilo, or whatever they are, pastel pencils. They're all lovely for going over the top of watercolour. This is a light grey, this pastel pencil I have here, which is probably better than white, because like I said, they are a kind of a grey blue. This one is a grey blue, so let's try this one. It's maybe a little bit dark. I kind of like this lovely grey colour. Little tiny, little tiny feathery strokes. And that is going to give you the look of those light, let's go back to the white, light edges to those feathers. And it's going to look softer than the P.H. Martin's white for doing that. The other place there's some lovely little light feathers is, there's some fluffy little light feathers under here. And again, little strokes with your, if you have a charcoal pencil. If you don't, they literally cost about $2 each. They're a great investment. And you can always like smudge them. Now I know I say don't use your finger on your paper, but mine's finished now and I'm not going to paint on it anymore. So that's a point where you can, if you want, do a little smudging with your finger. But there, that's just kind of picked up some of those highlights on the feathers. And even that space where it was kind of blue, I'm going to use this rather nice blue one. They just have numbers, they don't have colours written on them. That because I forgot to leave a little bit of white space there for the blue, I'm just going to add a little bit of blue pastel. It's kind of nice. Also, if you wanted to get a little bit more shading in the eye to make it a little bit more round and wet, look at that, just a little touch of that blue just makes the eye stand out. And the last thing I want to do is sprinkle some P.H. Martin's white snow. Now you don't have to do this. If you've got a lovely snowy look with your salt, which this one has, you don't have to do this. You can just leave it as it is. But if you did want to sprinkle some snow everywhere, what I like to do is at least cover up most of the bird, because I don't want the snow going on his black beak. Black face rather. I don't really want it going all over the bird, but I can get it on the other parts of the sky. Absolutely essential to have really clean water, because otherwise you're not going to get white paint. I have a little jar here and I'm going to use a stiffer brush, and it's sort of an acrylic or watercolor brush, but mostly acrylic, and it's clean. I haven't had any red paint in it. It's amazing, even if you think your brushes are clean, if you haven't given them a thorough rinsing with soap and water, that you'll still get some red paint in there. So I'm mixing up some liquid Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White in this little tray on a fairly big brush. And then I'm going to hold it diagonally to my painting, and I'm going to tap it on my finger quite hard. Be aware that everything around you is going to get this splattered all over it. I usually have to wash it off my computer after I've done this. And my camera. My camera has now got white splattered right up to the top of it, but it's washable. I'm going to move that over a little bit and just do a bit more over here. And you need a fairly big, this is a number 8 synthetic brush. Go a little bit more. I'm going to go a bit wild with this one. It's Christmas. Let's get some good snow on there. Right, I move this out of the way. And of course, if you didn't manage to get any snow on his beak, then you can use some of this white, clean it in the clean water. Make sure your brush is absolutely clean. What I have on my table is I always have a little thing of Pear's soap here to make sure that my brushes get really clean. And it's a great way to keep them nice too. If you wash them, thoroughly rinse them, wipe them gently in some Pear's soap or a brush soap, and then just pull them back to a nice point. And you can store them with the soap on there. It will keep the points nice and keep the bristles nice. But I just made sure that was really, really clean, so that if I'm using white, let's zoom in. If I hadn't got any white snow on the beak, I can use this bleed-proof white to add some if I needed to. I don't really need to, but just to show you what you can do. If I'd lost the reflection in the eye, I could add a little bit with this. I don't want to add too much. And if I wanted to do the highlights on the feathers with this rather than with the chalk pencil, I would actually mix it. I don't want to mix it on there. I'll mix it on the side of here. I'm going to grab a little bit of phthalo blue. Oops, you need to show it. Got a little bit of phthalo blue, look, and I'm just mixing it with a little bit of that white on the side, and with a very, very tiny brush I might be able to get some of those highlights on the feathers. And they're not pure white, they are a bluey white, but you can see it's not, you know, it's not a really, really strong bluey white, it's just a slight blue. So if you actually want to do that in paint, then I was just mixing just a tiny, tiny bit of phthalo blue with your white and adding your highlights with a very, very fine brush if you want them. But you might not. Anyway, let's pull back. And there's your Cardinal. Now, I did send you a sheet that you can, it's not as good as having the card like I have for the greetings. What I have done for the people in the live class is I've cut them out, the ovals, and I've stamped. Sorry, Carolyn. Carolyn is a calligrapher, and I should be doing this in my pen, but I'm too darn lazy to do 20 of them in my pen, so I've stamped them with my stamp in waterproof black ink. And you can always print that sheet and cut it out if you wanted to put one on there. If you don't, you can just leave it like this. You can sometimes buy these sort of greetings things in craft shops and dollar stores that you can just stick on, but it's totally up to you. And if you are good at calligraphy, you can make your own and put that on there. And like I said, I just use masking tape to put mine on to scan it. Other than that, you can just leave it as it is. And there's our Cardinal. I hope you enjoyed painting that Cardinal. We went into quite a bit of detail, and you don't need to do that. You could just do some wet in wet, yellow and red and colour, and then pick it out with some black pen and some black paint afterwards if you wanted to do a looser one. But we did a detailed one today. So I hope yours turned out well. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.